The hall breathed with a quiet intelligence, its walls shifting in faint gradients of violet as if they were listening more carefully than anyone inside them. Karev noticed that before he noticed the princess. It was the sort of detail that mattered. Environments that reacted, surfaces that remembered. Places like this tended to punish the inattentive. He adjusted his stance slightly, testing the floor again. It yielded just enough to be annoying. Not unstable, not dangerous, just disrespectful. He exhaled slowly and shifted his weight to compensate, pretending the motion had been intentional. No one seemed to care. That was good. He preferred it that way. Voices filled the chamber, layered and fluid, the Vathri language moving like something alive. Karev listened without looking like he was listening. Years of practice made that easy. He kept his gaze forward, unfocused, as if the polished mineral pillars held his full attention. They didn't. He had already mapped the room twice in his head. Entrances, exits, line of sight, the subtle clustering of individuals by rank rather than by position. The Vathri didn't stand randomly. They never did. And then there was her. Princess Prin stood slightly elevated on a low platform that was not quite a stage and not quite not a stage. The lighting adjusted around her, brightening in a way that felt almost polite. She moved with an ease that suggested she had never once needed to question whether she belonged somewhere. Her long ears angled gently backward, then forward again, catching sounds in a way that was almost, but not entirely, human. Karev allowed himself a brief glance, just enough to confirm what he had already assumed. Composed, alert, dangerous in the way well-educated people often were. Then he returned his attention to nothing in particular. A V3 official began speaking, his tone carrying the soft authority of someone who expected to be obeyed without raising his voice. Karev let the words pass over him, catching the structure rather than the meaning. Not yet. It was too early to show interest. Beside the princess, another V3 leaned closer to her, their voices lowered, shifting into a more private cadence. Karev didn't move. Ornamental, the companion said in Vathri, the word precise and lightly amused. Karev's focus sharpened, though nothing in his posture changed. Prin responded with a soft sound that might have been agreement. Her tone carried that effortless confidence, the kind that came from never needing to consider the possibility of being wrong. She added something else, something about placement, about symmetry. Karev translated it automatically. He wished he hadn't. For a moment he considered the floor again. It was still slightly unstable. That was disappointing. He kept listening. There was no cruelty in her voice. That was the interesting part. No sharp edges, no deliberate harm. Just certainty. Just the quiet assumption that he did not matter enough to be understood. Karev had encountered worse. Much worse. This barely qualified as an inconvenience. Still, he felt something shift. Not anger. Not quite. More like a small adjustment in direction. A recalibration. The official continued speaking. Something about trade corridors. Something about shared oversight. Karev let it all settle into place, filing away details with the same care he had used in very different rooms, under very different circumstances. Behind him, someone shifted. To his left, a faint movement suggested a guard repositioning. The hall responded with a subtle change in color, a soft ripple of light that passed along the walls and faded. Karev almost smiled. He wondered briefly what the hall would do if someone told a joke. He considered testing it, then decided against it. Timing mattered. Prin spoke again, still in Vathri, her voice light. She added another remark, shorter this time, something about stillness, about whether he had been designed that way or if it was a learned behavior. Her companion gave a quiet laugh. Karev inhaled slowly, then let the breath out just as carefully. He shifted his weight again, deliberately this time, letting the floor dip slightly beneath him before correcting. It was a small, controlled motion, enough to remind himself that he was still here, still present, still listening. He waited. The conversation moved on, drifting into safer territory. Protocols, expectations, the usual choreography of diplomacy. Karev let the rhythm settle, counting the pauses, the transitions, the subtle cues that indicated when someone was about to speak. Then he chose his moment, It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even particularly noticeable at first. He simply spoke, his voice entering the space at exactly the point where silence would have otherwise continued. And he spoke in Vathri. The accent was there, of course. It would always be there. But the structure held, the tones aligned. The meaning was clear. He addressed the princess without looking directly at her. Not yet. I was placed here intentionally, he said, his voice calm, almost conversational. Symmetry is considered important. There was a pause. A real one this time. Not the polite kind. Karev let it stretch for a fraction longer than necessary. Then he added, just slightly softer, I have found that stillness is often learned. Now he looked at her, only briefly, just enough. Then he returned his gaze to the hall, as if the walls had suddenly become very interesting again. The silence did not break all at once. It unfolded slowly, like a mechanism realizing it had been triggered too late. Prin did not move immediately. Her posture remained composed, her chin lifted at the exact angle expected of her, but something in the alignment of her ears shifted. Forward now, attentive, no longer dismissive. The hall responded in kind, its faint violet tones deepening, as if it too had noticed the disruption. Karev said nothing further. He had already said enough. A Vathri official cleared his throat, the sound precise and controlled, an attempt to reclaim the rhythm of the room. He resumed speaking about cooperative jurisdiction over a minor orbital corridor, though the importance of the topic seemed to have quietly evaporated. Words continued, but attention had fractured. Prin listened, or appeared to. In reality, her thoughts had narrowed sharply around a single point. The human had spoken Vathri, not just words but structure. Not just structure, but intent. She turned her head slightly, just enough to look at him, without fully acknowledging that she was doing so. He stood exactly where he had been before, his expression unchanged, his gaze unfocused in that peculiar way that now felt far less passive than it had moments ago. Her companion leaned closer again, though this time the motion lacked its earlier ease. You heard that, the companion murmured in Vathri, the tone stripped of its amusement. I did, Prin replied. There was a brief pause, then the companion added, Do you think? Yes, Prin said quietly. I think. The answer did not clarify anything. Karev shifted his weight again. The floor dipped, then corrected. He adjusted without looking down this time, as if he had finally decided to make peace with it. Under his breath, barely audible, he muttered something in his own language. Prin caught none of the words, but the cadence carried a familiar shape. It sounded suspiciously like annoyance. That, for reasons she could not immediately explain, made the situation feel even more complicated. The briefing continued, though now it felt like a performance no one quite believed in. One of the officials attempted to introduce a visual projection, gesturing toward a hovering interface that responded with a faint delay, as if it too had been distracted. The image flickered, stabilized, then rotated to display a cluster of star systems connected by thin, luminous lines. Karev glanced at it once, then again, slightly longer. His brow furrowed just enough to suggest he had noticed something. Prin followed his gaze, then looked back at him. You see something, she said in Vathri. It was not a question. Karev tilted his head a fraction, as if considering whether to respond. Then he spoke, still not looking directly at her. The alignment is off, he said. One of the officials paused mid-sentence. Off? Karev stepped forward half a pace, then stopped, as though remembering that stepping forward in a Vathri briefing might carry implications he had no interest in dealing with. He gestured subtly instead. That corridor, he said, indicating one of the luminous lines. If that projection is meant to represent current drift patterns, then it's outdated, by at least 3 cycles. The official frowned, clearly offended by the suggestion. The data is verified? Karev nodded. I'm sure it was. There was a beat of silence. Then, unexpectedly, Prin spoke again. Show the updated model. The official hesitated. Princess? Show it, she repeated, her tone calm but leaving no room for interpretation. The projection flickered again. New data replaced the old, the lines shifting, bending slightly to reflect corrected trajectories. The corridor Karev had indicated moved just enough to validate his observation. The official's expression tightened. A minor variance. Karev considered that. Minor variances tend to become major problems when ships are involved. There was no edge in his voice. That was the unsettling part. He sounded as though he were discussing weather. Prince studied the projection, then glanced at Karev again. "You noticed that quickly," she said. Karev shrugged lightly. "I've made worse mistakes." The statement hung in the air for a moment. Prin found herself asking, before she had fully decided to, "In those campaigns you mentioned?" Karev's expression shifted, just slightly. Not discomfort, not reluctance. Something closer to recognition. "Yes," he said simply. Her companion, who had been silent for longer than usual, leaned back slightly, as if reassessing the entire arrangement of the room. The hall dimmed a fraction, then brightened again, adjusting to the subtle shift in emotional tone. Prin exhaled slowly. "This floor," Karev said suddenly, glancing down for the first time in several minutes. "Is it always like this?" Prin blinked, caught off guard by the abrupt change in subject. "Like what?" He shifted his weight again. The surface dipped in response. "Uncertain." For a moment she simply stared at him. Then unexpectedly, she let out a small laugh. "It adjusts to Vathri physiology," she said. "It is not designed for humans." Karev nodded thoughtfully. "That explains why it feels like it's judging me." The companion made a quiet, involuntary sound that might have been amusement. Prin's smile lingered a fraction longer than she intended. The tension in the room did not disappear, but it changed shape. It became something less sharp, less immediate, something that could be examined rather than endured. Karev returned his attention to the projection, as if nothing unusual had occurred. Prin, however, did not look away from him right away. The session dissolved in a way that felt orderly only on the surface. Voices lowered, formal phrases were exchanged, and the projection dimmed as if it had decided its job was finished. But something had shifted beneath that structure, something that did not return to its previous place. Prin stepped down from the low platform, the floor adjusting instantly to her weight, steady and responsive. She did not hurry. Vathri did not hurry. But her attention was no longer distributed across the room as it had been before. It narrowed quietly toward a single point. Karev. He remained where he had been, allowing others to move first. A pair of officials passed in front of him, their conversation quick and subdued, casting brief glances in his direction before continuing on. He did not acknowledge them. Instead, he tested the floor again with a subtle shift, as if still negotiating a private disagreement with it. It dipped. He sighed very softly. Prin noticed that. She wasn't entirely sure why. Her companion leaned in once more, though the earlier tone had not returned. "You intend to speak with him," the companion said in Vathri. Prin did not answer immediately. Her gaze lingered on Karev, on the way he stood. Not rigid, not relaxed, but balanced, like someone who expected the environment to betray him at any moment, and had already decided how he would respond. "Yes," she said at last. "That is unusual," the companion replied carefully. "So is he." The companion considered that, then inclined their head slightly, conceding the point without argument. Prin moved forward, not directly, not in a straight line. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she adjusted her path in a way that appeared incidental, allowing the flow of the room to carry her closer. It was a practiced skill, one she had learned long before she understood why it was necessary. Karev noticed her approach before she reached him. Of course he did. His gaze shifted just enough to acknowledge her presence without committing to it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hall dimmed slightly, transitioning into its post-session state. The walls softened to a pale silver, the ambient hum lowering in pitch. Prin broke the silence. "In the academy," she said in V3, her tone measured, "we studied the Kareth Expanse campaign." Karev's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "That sounds unfortunate," he said. Prin blinked once, caught off guard by the response. "Unfortunate?" He nodded slightly. "It was not a well-organized campaign." "That is not how it is presented," she replied. Karev tilted his head, considering that. "No," he said. "It wouldn't be." There was a brief pause. Prin found herself adjusting her stance, though the floor did not require it. You were there, she said. Yes. She hesitated, then added, it is considered a decisive victory. Karev glanced at her then, properly this time. Not long, not intensely, just enough to meet her gaze before looking away again. It was, he said. Eventually. The word lingered. Prin felt something shift again, though this time it was not discomfort. It was curiosity, sharpened by the realization that what she had been taught might not align perfectly with what had happened. You speak of it as though it were... She paused, searching for the right word. Incomplete. Karev's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. Most victories are. Behind them, a group of Vathri officials passed, their conversation briefly intersecting with the space around them before moving on. The hall responded with a faint ripple of light, acknowledging the movement and then settling again. Prin glanced toward the projection interface, now dimmed but still active. The tactical records show... They show the part that worked, Karev said gently. She turned back to him. And the part that did not? Karev shifted his weight again. The floor dipped, then corrected. He looked down at it for a moment, as if debating whether it was worth continuing the argument. It is not recorded in the same way, he said. Prin studied him, her long ears angling slightly forward, attentive. Why? Karev exhaled slowly. Because it is less useful for instruction. That seems inefficient. It is, he agreed. But it is also comforting. She frowned slightly. Comfort is not a strategic advantage. Karev nodded. No, but it is a political one. There was a brief silence. Prin considered that, turning it over in her mind, testing its structure. It did not fit neatly into the framework she had been taught. That made it more interesting. You are suggesting that the record is selective, she said. I am suggesting that it is curated, Karev replied. The distinction settled between them. Prin's gaze lingered on him a moment longer, then shifted downward, just briefly, as he adjusted his stance again. The floor dipped. She almost smiled. You are still having difficulty with the surface, she observed. Karev followed her gaze, then looked back up. We have not reached an agreement. It is adaptive, she said. It responds to intent. He raised an eyebrow slightly. That explains why it feels uncertain. Prin tilted her head. Uncertain? Karev nodded. It's waiting for me to decide how much I trust it. She considered that, then let out a small, quiet laugh. And do you? He paused, then shifted his weight once more. The floor dipped, steadied, and held. Karev looked down at it, then back at her. Not yet, he said. The corridor outside the hall was quieter, though not silent. The station never allowed true silence. There was always a faint hum beneath everything, like a distant machine thinking too slowly to notice itself. Prin walked beside Karev, not ahead of him, not behind him. The adjustment was subtle, almost invisible, but it changed the geometry of their movement. The corridor walls shifted in muted tones of pale blue, reacting to their proximity, their pace, perhaps even their thoughts. Karev noticed that immediately. He slowed half a step, watching how the light followed, then caught himself and resumed a more consistent pace. Does it always do that? He asked. Yes, Prin replied. It reflects emotional resonance. Karev glanced at the wall again. It seems optimistic. Prin turned her head slightly. Optimistic? It hasn't dimmed yet, he said. She paused for a fraction of a second, then let out a soft breath that might have been amusement. Perhaps it finds you less difficult than the floor. Karev nodded thoughtfully. That would make it the first surface on this station to reach that conclusion. They continued walking. For a time, neither of them spoke. The corridor curved gently, leading them past a series of transparent panels that revealed the exterior of the station. Beyond them, space stretched in layered gradients of deep indigo and scattered light. Distant ships moving along precise, silent paths. Prin slowed near one of the panels. Karev stopped as well, though a fraction later, as if he had chosen to match her pace rather than anticipate it. You studied the campaigns? He said after a moment. I did. Why? The question was simple, but not casual. Prin considered her answer. Because they are part of our strategic history. That is the official reason. She glanced at him. There are others. Karev waited. Prin's reflection hovered faintly in the transparent panel, her long ears angled slightly backward now, thoughtful rather than defensive. "We study them," she said, "because they show us what happens when control is lost." Karev's gaze shifted to the distant ships outside. "Control is always lost," he said. "Not always," she replied. He shook his head, just slightly. "Only when it matters." The statement settled into the space between them, quiet but persistent. Prin turned fully toward him now. "In the Kareth expanse," she said, "what was lost?" Karev exhaled slowly. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he shifted his weight again, testing the floor even here, as if he expected it to behave differently outside the hall. It didn't. "That depends on when you measure it," he said. Prin frowned slightly. "Explain." "At the beginning," he said, "we lost time. We misread the movement patterns, assumed they would follow a predictable route. They didn't." "That is documented," she said. Karev nodded. "Yes, that part is safe to include." "And later?" He glanced at her, then away again. "Later we lost people." The words were simple. Too simple. Prin felt the weight of them anyway. "How many?" she asked. Karev tilted his head slightly, as if considering whether the number itself mattered. "Enough to change the plan," he said. "That is not a number." "No," he agreed. "It's more accurate." Prin opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. For a moment, she found herself without a precise counterpoint, which was unusual. Karev watched her briefly, then added, "If you prefer, I can provide an estimate." She narrowed her eyes slightly. "You are making a joke." "A small one," he admitted. Prin exhaled, something between a sigh and a quiet laugh. "You choose strange moments for humor." Karev considered that. "It improves them." She almost disagreed. Almost. Instead, she turned back to the panel, watching as a distant vessel adjusted its trajectory, its engines flaring briefly, before settling into a new path. "You said most victories are incomplete," she said. "What completes them?" Karev followed her gaze. "Time," he said. "And if time is not available?" He paused, then shifted his weight again. The floor dipped, steadied, and held. "Then you redefine victory," he said. Prin was quiet for a long moment. The corridor lights shifted subtly, deepening into a softer hue, as if responding to something neither of them had fully articulated. Finally, she spoke again. "When I spoke earlier," she said, her voice steady but lower now. "In the hall." Karev did not look at her. "Yes. I did not expect to be understood." "I gathered that." There was no sharpness in his tone. That made it worse. Prin straightened slightly. "It was an incorrect assumption." Karev nodded once. "It was." She waited as if expecting more. He said nothing. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but not entirely settled either. Prin felt something unfamiliar press at the edges of her thoughts. Not quite embarrassment, not quite regret. Something more complex, less defined. "You could have responded differently," she said after a moment. Karev glanced at her. "How so?" "You could have repeated what I said." He considered that, then shook his head. "That would have been less efficient." "Efficient?" "Yes," he said. "This way you have more information." Prince stared at him for a moment, then let out a short, quiet laugh. "You are unusual," she said. Karev nodded. "I've been told." She studied him, her expression no longer amused, but not distant either. The corridor lights shifted again, settling into a steady, neutral glow. Prin looked at the wall, then at the floor, then back at Karev. "The surfaces here respond to intent," she said. "Yes. And you do not trust them." "Not yet." She tilted her head slightly. "Why?" Karev paused, then shifted his weight one more time. The floor dipped, steadied, and held without resistance. He looked down at it, then back at her. "Because they are still deciding what I am," he said. They did not return to the main hall. Instead, the corridor guided them, almost deliberately, toward a quieter sector of the station, where the walls no longer shimmered with ceremonial awareness, but settled into a more practical stillness. The lighting softened, the hum lowered, and the architecture lost its need to impress. Karev seemed more comfortable here, not relaxed exactly, but less negotiated. He walked without testing each step, though once or twice he still shifted his weight out of habit, as if expecting the floor to argue with him. It didn't. Prin noticed that too. It appears, she said, glancing down briefly, you have reached an agreement. Karev followed her gaze, then looked forward again. A temporary ceasefire. She almost smiled. They entered a chamber that opened without sound, its entrance recognizing their presence, before either of them paused. Inside, a wide circular interface hovered at waist height, projecting layers of rotating data, star maps, fleet signatures, probability threads weaving through potential outcomes. Prin stepped toward it, her fingers moving through the projection with practiced precision. The data responded instantly, rearranging itself, narrowing into a focused display. This is the updated corridor model, she said, the one you corrected. Karev approached more slowly, his eyes scanning the shifting information. I didn't correct it, he said. I noticed it was wrong. That is correction, she replied. He considered that. It's a start. Prin adjusted the model again, isolating a section of the corridor where the drift had caused a subtle but significant deviation. Several small vessels were marked along the path, their trajectories intersecting in ways that suggested future complications. This is where the variance becomes relevant, she said. Karev leaned slightly closer, careful not to step into the projection itself. If those paths converge at that angle, he said, you'll have a timing conflict. Prin nodded. Yes. And if one of those vessels is slower than expected, they will collide, she finished. Karev tilted his head. Or worse. She glanced at him. Worse? They won't collide, he said. They'll avoid each other at the last possible moment and create a cascade. Prin paused, her fingers hovering over the interface. A cascade, Karev gestured toward the projection. Every adjustment forces another. You get a chain reaction of corrections. Ships start compensating for ships that are compensating for other ships. Prin watched the model, then initiated a simulation. The projected vessels began to move, their paths adjusting as predicted. At first, the motion seemed manageable. Then the timing shifted. One vessel altered course slightly, forcing another to respond. Then another. Within moments, the entire corridor destabilized into a web of near intersections and last-second evasions. Prin's ears angled forward sharply. That is inefficient, she said. Karev nodded. It is also very common. She terminated the simulation, the projection collapsing back into stillness. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Prin looked at him. You have seen this before? Yes. In combat. Mostly, he said. Though sometimes it happens without anyone trying. She studied him, her expression thoughtful. You speak as though chaos is expected. Karev shrugged lightly. It usually is. Prin turned back to the interface, adjusting the model again, this time introducing a controlled delay into one of the vessels. The simulation restarted, the path shifting more smoothly, the cascade avoided. This stabilizes the corridor, she said. Karev watched the projection, then nodded. It does. She glanced at him. You approve? I don't disapprove, he said. Prin exhaled softly. You are very precise with your approval. Karev considered that. It avoids misunderstandings. She almost laughed. Instead, she stepped back from the interface, allowing the projection to dim slightly. At the academy, she said, we are taught to anticipate conflict, to eliminate variables before they become threats. Karev nodded. That's a good approach. But you speak as though variables cannot be eliminated. They can't, he said. Prin frowned slightly. That is a pessimistic view. It's a practical one, he replied. She crossed her arms, her posture shifting into something more analytical. Then what is the alternative? Karev glanced at the projection, then at her. You don't eliminate variables, he said. You learn how they behave. Prin tilted her head. And if they behave unpredictably? Karev smiled faintly. Then you learn faster. There was a brief silence. Prin found herself watching him again, not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity. The way he spoke, the way he approached problems, it did not align with the structured certainty she had been trained to rely on. And yet it worked. That was the part she could not ignore. You are not what I expected, she said. Karev nodded. That seems to be a recurring theme. She hesitated, then added, when I first saw you, I assumed. She stopped. Karev waited. Prin exhaled slowly. I assumed you were placed there to observe without contributing. Karev tilted his head slightly. That is technically accurate. She blinked. It is. Yes, he said. I was assigned as an observer. Prin stared at him for a moment, then let out a short, incredulous breath. And yet, you contribute. Karev shrugged. Observation includes noticing things. She shook her head slightly, a faint smile forming despite herself. You are deliberately difficult. I try not to be, he said. It happens anyway. The projection dimmed further, the chamber settling into a quieter state. Prin looked at him, her expression no longer guarded, no longer distant. There was something else there now, something she did not yet have a precise word for. You said earlier, she began, that most victories are incomplete. Karev nodded. What would make them complete? She asked. He considered the question for a moment, then glanced at the interface, at the stabilized corridor, at the paths that now moved without conflict. Nothing, he said. Prin frowned. Nothing? He looked back at her. Completion is not the goal, he said. Survival is. The chamber dimmed further as the projection powered down, leaving only a faint lattice of light hovering like a memory that had not yet decided to fade. Prin did not move immediately. Karev didn't either. The quiet between them had changed again, settling into something that no longer demanded to be filled. Then the station spoke. Not with a voice, not exactly. The walls shifted tone, subtle at first, then more pronounced, a ripple of amber threading through the pale blue. The floor beneath them responded a fraction of a second later, tightening its structure, losing that slight give it had held before. Karev noticed both changes at once. That doesn't feel like optimism, he said. Prin's posture straightened, her attention snapping toward the doorway as a thin line of light formed along its edge. No, she said. It doesn't. The door opened without ceremony. A V3 attendant stood beyond it, their expression composed but their ears angled forward in a way that signaled urgency. Princess, the attendant said, there is a deviation in Corridor 7. Prin stepped forward immediately. Define deviation. The stabilized model has begun to drift again. Prin's gaze flicked briefly to Karev, then back to the attendant. That is not possible. The correction was implemented. Yes, the attendant replied. It is also no longer holding. Karev exhaled softly. That sounds familiar. Prin turned toward him. You anticipated this. I considered it, he said. That is not the same. It is when it happens anyway. For a fraction of a second, Prin looked as though she might argue. Then she didn't. Show me, she said. The attendant stepped aside. The corridor beyond had already shifted, its lighting sharper now, less decorative, more functional. They moved quickly, not running, but faster than before, their steps aligning without discussion. Karev kept pace easily, though once, as they turned a corner, the floor beneath him adjusted abruptly, and he had to correct mid-step. He caught himself, then muttered, We were getting along. Prin did not slow. It adapts to urgency. It seems to interpret urgency as hostility. That is not entirely inaccurate. They reached a secondary control chamber, smaller than the first but more densely populated with active systems. Projections filled the space, overlapping layers of data flickering as updates streamed in real time. Prin moved directly to the central interface, her hands already in motion before the system fully recognized her presence. The display expanded, isolating Corridor 7, its once stable paths now bending again, the lines no longer clean but subtly distorted. Karev stepped beside her, his gaze scanning the shifting trajectories. That's not drift, he said. Prin's hands paused. Explain. He pointed, not at the main corridor but at a secondary vector, one that barely registered against the larger paths. That's an insertion? Prin narrowed her eyes. An external vessel? Not exactly, Karev said. It's matching the corridor's movement too precisely. The attendant stepped closer. That is not in the registry. It wouldn't be, Karev replied. Prin adjusted the projection, isolating the anomaly. The system resisted for a fraction of a second, then complied, revealing a faint signature embedded within the corridor's flow. "It's masking itself," she said. Karev nodded. "Yes, that is not standard technology." "No," he agreed. "It's not." Prin's ears angled forward sharply. "Then what is it?" Karev considered the projection, his expression tightening just enough to suggest recognition. "It's someone who doesn't want to be seen," he said. The chamber fell into a brief, focused silence. Prin initiated a deeper scan, the system responding with a cascade of data. The anomaly flickered, its position shifting slightly as if aware of the attention placed on it. "It is adjusting," she said. Karev nodded. "Of course it is. Can we isolate it?" He tilted his head. "Eventually." "That is not sufficient." "It rarely is," he said. Prin exhaled sharply, then reconfigured the model, introducing a series of controlled disruptions into the corridor's flow. The projection reacted instantly, the paths bending, forcing the anomaly to compensate. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the faint signature shifted more dramatically, its masking pattern breaking just enough to reveal a clearer outline. The attendant leaned forward. "It is a vessel." Karev shook his head. "It's more than that." Prin glanced at him. "Explain." "It's not just moving through the corridor," he said. "It's using it." Prin's hands stilled. "Using it how?" Karev gestured toward the projection. "It's treating the drift as cover. Every adjustment we make gives it more space to hide." Prin stared at the display, her mind recalculating its speed. "Then stabilizing the corridor was—" "A mistake," Karev said. She turned to him sharply. "It prevented a cascade." "Yes," he agreed, "and it made everything else predictable." Prin held his gaze for a moment, the weight of the realization settling in. Then unexpectedly, she let out a short, quiet laugh. "This is inefficient," she said. Karev nodded. "Very." "And yet," she added, her eyes returning to the projection, "it is also interesting." Karev allowed himself a faint smile. "That's one way to describe it." The anomaly shifted again, its path bending just enough to avoid the latest disruption. Prin's expression sharpened. "It is learning." Karev glanced at her. "So are we." She adjusted the model once more, her movements more deliberate now, less focused on control and more on response. For the first time since the deviation had been detected, the projection did not immediately resist. It adapted. Prin watched it closely, then spoke without looking away. "You said earlier that variables cannot be eliminated." "Yes, and that we must learn how they behave." Karev nodded. Prin's ears angled forward, her posture settling into something precise and focused. "Then we will observe it," she said. Karev glanced at her, then back at the shifting projection. "That," he said, "is a good start." The anomaly did not leave. It adapted. For several cycles, the chamber became a place of quiet pursuit, the projection alive with shifting paths and calculated uncertainty. Prin no longer tried to eliminate the distortion. She shaped it, nudged it, allowed its space to reveal itself. Karev stood beside her, not behind, not apart. At one point, he leaned slightly closer to the projection, then stopped himself before stepping fully into it. "I assume this would be frowned upon," he said. "It would respond," Prin replied. "In what way?" She considered. "Unpredictably." Karev nodded. "Then I will continue to not do that." The anomaly shifted again, its movement sharper now, less patient. It was reacting, not just to the corridor but to them. Prin saw it first. "It is no longer hiding," she said. Karev followed the movement. "No," he agreed. "It's deciding." "Deciding what?" He watched the projection for a moment, then said, "Whether we are a threat." Prin adjusted the model, introducing a deliberate gap in the corridor structure, a space where the anomaly could move freely if it chose to. The projection flickered. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the anomaly moved into the gap. The masking pattern dissolved just enough to reveal the vessel beneath. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Its shape was unfamiliar, its signature unlike anything in the V3 registry. It did not follow standard propulsion patterns. It did not behave like a vessel that expected to be seen. Prin's breath stilled, just slightly. "It is not hostile," she said. Karev tilted his head. Not yet. The vessel adjusted again, its movement slower now, almost cautious. It did not advance further into the corridor. It remained within the space Prin had created, as if testing its boundaries. It is observing us, she said. Karev nodded. Yes. There was a brief silence. Then Prin did something unexpected. She removed the remaining constraints from the model. The corridor stabilized, not rigidly, not perfectly, but enough to remove the artificial pressure they had been applying. The space around the vessel opened, no longer forcing it to react. The projection settled. The vessel did not move immediately. Then slowly, it shifted its orientation, not toward the corridor, toward them. Prin's ears angled forward, her posture steady. Karev exhaled softly. That's new. It is communicating, she said. Without word, he added. Yes. The vessel held its position for a moment longer, then adjusted its trajectory, away from the corridor, away from the station. Its signature dimmed, the masking pattern returning, though less completely than before. It was no longer hiding, not entirely. Then it was gone. The projection cleared, the anomaly's path fading into the background data. The corridor remained stable. No cascade, no conflict. Prin did not move. Karev didn't either. The chamber was quiet again, the hum of the station returning to its usual, almost comforting rhythm. After a moment, Karev shifted his weight. The floor dipped, then steadied without resistance. He glanced down, then back at Prin. I think it likes me now. Prin let out a soft breath that turned into a quiet laugh. It has adapted. So have I, he said. She looked at him then, properly, without hesitation, without distance. Yes, she said. There was a pause. Prin stepped back from the interface, the projection dimming in response. Her posture changed, not dramatically, but enough. Less rigid, less defined by expectation. When I first spoke to you, she said, I believed I understood what you were. Karev nodded. That was efficient. It was incorrect. That happens. Prin studied him, her expression thoughtful. You allowed it to happen. He considered that. I didn't stop it. Why? Karev glanced at the now empty projection, then back at her. It gave you a reference point. Prin tilted her head slightly. For what? For change, he said. The words settled quietly, without force, without expectation. Prin looked away for a moment, her gaze resting on the wall as it shifted into a soft, neutral tone. I have studied many campaigns, she said. Many outcomes. Many decisions. Karev listened. But I have not experienced. She paused, searching for the word, then continued anyway. This. Karev nodded slightly. It's less structured. Yes, she said. And more accurate. There was a brief silence. Prin turned back to him. You said you fought in 15 campaigns. I did. She hesitated, then asked, Did you win them? Karev thought about that for a moment. Some of them, he said. And the others? He shrugged lightly. I'm still here. Prin stared at him, then let out a quiet, genuine laugh. That is not how we define victory, she said. I know, he replied. It's more practical. She shook her head slightly, though the smile remained. The chamber lights shifted once more, settling into a steady, balanced glow. Prin straightened, her posture returning, but not to what it had been before. There was something different now, something less absolute. I misjudged you, she said. Karev nodded. You did. There was no edge to it, no accusation. Prin took a small breath. I also misjudged what I was observing. Karev glanced at her. That's more common. She met his gaze, her long ears angled forward, attentive, open. I will correct that, she said. Karev considered her for a moment, then nodded. That's a good approach. They stood there, not as observer and subject, not as assumption and correction, but as something else, something still forming, still undefined. After a moment, Karev shifted his weight again. The floor held steady. He looked down, then back at Prin. I think we've reached an agreement, he said. Prin followed his gaze, then smiled faintly. Yes, she said.